You are listening to Eastman's Flycast, an adventure fly fishing specific podcast covering travel, tactics, and next level insight. Now your host, Brian Barney.
Hey, what's happening, guys? Got a brand new Eastman's Flycast for you. So today on the podcast, I have on Frank C. from Long Island. So Captain Frank, I met him through Baker, one of the friends at Eastman's, and so I was introduced to Frank. He runs a TV show called Fin Chasers, and so it's on Amazon, and you can watch it. It's a great show. But Frank comes from a totally different place than I come from, fishing for different species. And so it made for a super interesting conversation. He's got the same sickness as I do and as you guys do, as he absolutely loves to fish. Loves the challenge of it, loves learning, loves evolving. And it just made for a great conversation that I really enjoyed, and I think you guys will enjoy too. I want to thank our sponsor for today's show, AvidMax. AvidMax has a great internet site that you can get absolutely everything for fly fishing. They've got rods, reels, waders, flies, fly tying material. Heck, they even have things for travel and a great clearance section. They also have a in-person store that sits just outside of Denver that you can visit, but they've got a knowledgeable staff that can help you get outfitted for anything you're looking to fly fish for. So if you're in the market for anything fly fishing, make sure to check out AvidMax. And with that, let's get into this podcast. So this is super interesting. Man, Frank's an absolute go-getter, and it's fun to hear these stories about fishing for these different species, and also like this different fishery that I've never seen or fished in, but it's just two fly fishermen or two fishermen getting together that can relate and talk in depth about this stuff. So, man, I really enjoyed it. I know you guys are going to enjoy it too. Let's get into the show. Eastman's Flycast. I'm your host, Brian Barney. Frank C., because I can't say his last name.
So you must know Paul Bork as well then, right?
Yeah, well, I do know Paul Bork. I've had him on the podcast. I don't know him personally, but the guy is so fishy and so knowledgeable about fishing. He just he killed it on the podcast for sure.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so he's the producer of my show. We became very good friends, and anything of value that I know about trout fishing, I learned from him. Because I did it backwards, I did saltwater fly fishing first and then, backed into the trout, which is, very different than the way most people that I've met did it,
Yeah, that's way backwards. You're supposed to start small and work your way up, not the other way around, right?
Yeah. Well, the good thing was, like, the reason I got into it was, we didn't have a lot of big fish around 30 years ago, and we were doing ultralight stuff and just trying to target fish a certain way to make it more interesting, so we'd go out and say, well, today is only artificials or whatever, and then we just fish that way for the day just to try and make it more interesting rather than there's another one, and they were small, and you can get kind of jaded and I guess not appreciate the fishery as much, when it's tougher and there's smaller fish around, but if you can find a way to enjoy that and make you a better fisherman, that's kind of like the way I approached it, and that's fly fishing, learning fly fishing made me such a better fisherman, than anything I did in my life probably,
Wow, that's you bring up such a good point, Frank. That's so interesting. Yeah, us as humans, we like challenge, and if it gets too easy, we get bored with it. And so we tend to we tend to make it more difficult, and whether that's fly fishing or light tackle or, even in the fly fishing world of catching them on a dry or catching them on a streamer, that challenge and shift in perspective, it keeps us interested and keeps us hungry to learn. And you're right about that fly fishing. It makes us better overall fishermen, doesn't it? Just like a better understanding of that world.
Yeah, because, well, I mean, you think about it from a real brass tacks kind of perspective. If you're fishing live bait that's what's there, especially if you netted the bait or caught it right where you're fishing, right? You know, that's what they're eating. That's what's there. And other than your hook being in that bait, it's pretty much exactly what they're eating. So, yeah, I don't want to say there's no science to that either, because there certainly is. But, you know, we used to joke when people would break our chops about fly fishing and, you know, that you know, pretty much we were catching and releasing everything. So you come back every time and you don't have any fish throw up on the dock like, you know, most guys are doing. And, you know, I always thought about that. I read this book a long time ago called Dark Water, and I can't remember the author's name, but it was about these, you know, these guys that were, you know, I guess in their midlife or whatever, and, you know, they were fly fishing and they used to go down the Keys and all these different adventures and places they used to go, and, you know, how to get, you know, they'd come back and say, you know, they caught the tarpon on fly, and guys would be like, yeah, whatever, where is it? You know, like, where's your fish? You didn't catch anything. And so you know, we used to bring people's chops back and say, well, if I could teach a monkey to bait fish, you know, like, we put them on a hook for him, put the rod over the side, and you could train that monkey that when that rod bends and pull back the other way, you know. But and that's simplifying it, but it certainly makes you think about what is going on. And now you have a fly that has no scent, pretty much no three-dimensional profile, although some of the cool stuff that's out there today changes that to a large degree. But, you know, and you can only retrieve it pretty much a few different ways. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I remember this guy was saying how to catch you know, Spanish mackerel one time in Florida. He's like, well, just cast out and reel fast, and then reel faster than you can. Something like that. Like, you can't do that with a fly. Like, you can strip two-handed, whatever, but it's not going to, you don't have, dimensionally, you know, like, if I'm jig fishing, I can make sure that my jig is on the bottom in that one exact spot, you know, pretty much anytime I want to do that, right? Like, I know if those fish are on the bottom and they're in the hole and the hole's 30 feet away from me, I plop that little jig in there and I know it's going to be on the bottom in that hole. Now you're talking about fly casting. How do you swing that fly in, make sure it's down on the bottom if that's where you want it, at that spot? Like, man, there's so many different things going on, you know?
Man, yeah, you describe it well. Like, there's so many nuances to fishing with that, with a fly rod. And I, you know, my limited salt experience, like you know, it seemed like the spinning rod, even with artificial lures, was like 3-to-1 or 5-to-1 on a fly rod. Just because, you know, you can cast it so far, so accurate, it'll cast against the wind. And like you said, with that quick retrieve, those saltfish, man, they want that thing moving fast. And so that mechanical advantage of the reel really gets gets those artificial lures going quick where they'll eat them better, you know, to where a fly, yeah, you got to be able to toss that thing accurately, a good strip, a good fly. Like, there's so many nuances to it. And it's like the greater the challenge, the greater the reward. So when you love fishing with a fly rod and you take it out and try to catch, like in your instance, a tarpon with it, you know, it has to be an amazing experience to hook one up and be able to land it on that thing, and the fight too.
Yeah, right. I mean, and that's one thing though that people don't realize is that when you are fighting, other than the one-to-one real disadvantage, the rod helps you so much, you know? It really does. And you can beat fish sometimes faster with a fly rod than, you know, a stiff conventional rod or spinning rod, you know, because before the rod bends too much, the drag starts pulling and then there's line out. Versus, you know, the fly, you have to bend that whole 9-foot parabolic bend, you know, and if you can fight a fish the right way with a fly, you could beat some big fish, man. And, you know, the biggest fish we ever caught on fly on my own boat was a 100-pound bluefin, and my friend who's the Sage rep caught it. And when I watch him fight that fish on that rod, like, you realize, like, man, this is one of the toughest fighting fish in any ocean. And it's a monster size. And, you know, you think, how can it be done, you know? A fish with a giant eye that sees everything so good and decides to eat a little fly, you know? Like, that's, to me, like, the pinnacle of success with the fly, you know? To go after those targeted, you know, the fish that anybody would be happy to catch on any outfit, you know, any style fishing, and you could do it. I don't know what'd be harder than catching a tuna fish on a fly rod, you know, for what I do. I'm sure there's people would say, you know, whatever fish in their fishery is, but, you know, you're talking about a fish, like I said, that can see very, very good. And usually only wants to go after things that are going pretty fast, because if they goes too slow and they get a real good look at it, they just will swim away from it. You know, like, and it's not even a fraction of a second. They'll come up on a thing, look at it, boom, gone. And you've seen it, like, if you're bait fishing for tuna even, you know, and you're floating a chunk back or a sardine or whatever, and you're chumming, and you see them ripping through the chum, and then your bait's in there, and they will destroy every single thing that you just threw out except the one with the hook in it. You know, with, you know, 30-pound fluorocarbon leader sometimes, and you're like, there's no way. But they did, and they turn away from it in a fraction of a second. You can't even react and try and make it do something different. And then you can catch one of those things on a fly. It's just awesome, you know.
Man, that's wild, Frank. So where are you based out of?
So I grew up in Staten Island, New York, which is one of, you know, the 5 boroughs in New York City. And then 20, right after 9/11, well, shit got crazy in the city. And I actually happened to be in the harbor that day and helped with security and stuff. I was actually the one who told the Coast Guard that a plane had crashed into the building. They didn't even know at that point. The city was crazy, and we were looking for a place to get away if we had to. And my parents had a place in Long Beach Island, New Jersey, the Jersey Shore. So we started looking, and we ended up in 2002, first part of the year, buying our own place. So then, you know, I started fishing down South Jersey, and humbling, to say the least, you know.
It's tough,
at that point, I was probably guiding 6 trips a week, Monday to Friday in New York City, and then I would come down the shore on the weekend and could not catch a fish. You know, I'd catch, you know, my clients, 6 trips a week, destroy fish every trip, catch one fly, bait, spin, whatever, and then come down there and work all weekend and can't catch a fish. It's just different fishery, you know, different skill set needed, different places that you target them. But then it slowly started to change, and the fishing got tougher in the city, and then these fish started showing up more south, you know, and it was okay to try and figure that out. And then we had a weak fish run that lasted a long time, probably 8 or 10 years almost, and until Superstorm Sandy. And, you know, so that made for some great fly fishing, which is, you know what that is, a weak fish, like a sea trout?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I kind of know, but yeah, maybe describe it for me.
Yeah, so it's just like a speckled trout down south. You know, it's a little different. The Cynoscion regalis, theirs is a Cynoscion something else, you know, the Latin term, but Latin name rather. But it's, you know, we call them unicorns because they just become so scarce for so long, and you really have to be dedicated to kind of catch one. I mean, I don't know what the freshwater equivalent would be, like maybe a golden trout or a cutthroat or something. I don't know that much about those fish, but I know that those fish can only be caught in certain areas, and guys really target them, right, to try and catch them.
Yeah, exactly. How big do those fish get?
So the world record was actually caught in Staten Island, and it was 1980.
Oh, wow. That's a good one.
That's a monster.
Yeah.
You know, a 10-pounder is a fish of a lifetime. Actually, right now, there's probably more current weak fish world records that are standing that were set in Staten Island than anywhere else.
Man, that's crazy, Frank. Yeah, I just had no idea about that fishery up there.
In New York Harbor.
Yeah.
New York Harbor, there was certainly, so I had a 20-pound tippet world record for weak fish once. I set up my friend's granddaughter. She had the 8-pound tippet for a while. A lady I know in Staten Island has 3 of the current world records. A guy I know has 2 of them. My friend's son has 1 of them. You know, it's just, when the big ones show up, they historically have been there. But, you know, I've been tracking these fish like crazy. It's my obsession here in the Back Bay fishing is these weak fish. And, you know, it seems like a 20-year cycle before the big ones come back again. So you really got to be dedicated, you know.
Man, that's wild.
It's rewarding as hell.
Yeah, they sound like they're fun to fish for. Yeah, I like when you were talking about changing fisheries. It's so wild how when you go from one fishery to the next, it's almost like you're starting over. Like some of the same rules and theories apply, but learning a new fishery or a new system, whatever that may be, it's so difficult to learn, you know, the nuances to that fishery. And so you talked about switching over and going to the Jersey Shore and not being able to catch those things and having to really put in your time and effort to grow your knowledge base of that fishery. But then once you start to dial it in, and it sounds like waters have kind of changed or temperatures have changed, bringing new fish in or, you know, kind of changing that fishery. But it's just wild. I think us as humans, we're explorers by nature, and it's so fun to go to new places and try to figure it out from scratch, you know, no preconceived notions, and just try to learn from what works and what doesn't work and build your skill set to then be successful, you know, in that fishery. That's wild, Frank.
Yeah, when we first started fly fishing 30-something years ago, I guess. So I can remember when I bought my first saltwater fly rod because we booked, on my birthday, I like to either tuna fish or hunt. And especially back then when I was guiding a lot, you didn't get to fish a lot, you know, yourself. And my birthday is November 1st, so it was in the middle of a fall run. So I used to take that day all the time. Well, this one time, you know, it was early on. I didn't have a boat big enough to effectively offshore fish at that time. And so we booked a trip on a party boat, and the weather was bad, and the guy gave us our money back. And at $350, you know, we were going to go on this trip, and my friend said, why don't we get into fly fishing? You know, people are starting to do it in salt water more and more. And I was like, okay. And we drove down to Fisherman's Headquarters on Long Beach Island, where my house is now. And he had rods and reels in stock. And, you know, we bought that setup, and then that started the whole, you know, progression. But, you know, like you say, I tell people when they talk about getting into fly fishing or, you know, been thinking about doing it, I tell them it's like being a kid all over again. Like, you have that knowledge of fishing and understanding fish and tides and that, yeah, but you got to learn everything all over, you know. And I joined a club, and there was a big group of active guys in there in the Atlantic Highlands in New Jersey. But it'd be funny because somebody would catch a striped bass on a floating line with a clouser minnow, right? Like a sinking fly on a floating line. And then we'd go, that's what you got to do. And then everybody would rig that way, you know? And then we fished that way. And, yeah, it only worked in that one setting. You know, it was a flat, shallow area, and that's why it worked better there. And but I can remember standing in the surf with a fly rod and looking at, you know, an epoxy minnow, you know, little epoxy fly, and say, how could this fly in this big ocean catch a fish, And it's just mind-blowing, an inch and a half fly going into the Atlantic Ocean, and you're ballsy enough to think that, with that 50 to 100-foot cast, whatever you can make, 30-foot for a lot of guys, that you're going to try and catch one of these fish, But when you do, you don't forget what happened to make that success, reality, it becomes part of your repertoire. And you build off of that stuff. But I can see a lot of people just shying away from it too. I mean, I have this obsessive personality, I guess, and competitive, so, you're constantly trying to get better and figure stuff out. But I could definitely see people going out, getting fully outfitted, hitting the surf or going in a boat or whatever and not catching anything, a dozen times and then say, yeah, there's enough of that,
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's such
if you can make it happen.
Yeah, if you can make it happen, it's magic, right? That's amazing, Frank.
Yeah.
You had to be at the forefront of the fly fishing industry, at least on the, on the eastern side in New York and that. Like it was a lot easier to take spinning tackle or to take bait and go catch fish and be successful, but to take on fly fishing and trying to learn the ins and outs of it, to catch a fish, like you say, standing there with this fake fly, in this giant ocean and thinking you're going to catch a fish, but learning everything from floating leaders to sinking leaders to then the flies. And I think too, fly fishing, it demands that you learn the ecosystem. It demands that you learn, what those fish are eating, like what the size, what the shape, what the color is, and then being able to replicate that, in some sort of tie with yarn and hackle or epoxy flies, like you're saying, something that'll imitate that bait fish that they're eating, and also the movement of that bait fish, trying to get the articulation or the kick with that fly to get those stripes. Man, that's just wild. Get those strikes, but that's just wild that you took that on, that challenge, and it had to be to benefit you being a captain as well, like being able to offer fly fishing trips for these other guys that have taken on fly fishing or really like it.
Yeah, so we did that kind of backwards too. So me and my partner I met him through the fly fishing club, and we started fishing together. And I guess why we got along so famously was we were both obsessed. So we fished together a lot, and we were trying to figure stuff out. And then we started figuring stuff out, and he had fished for trout, for his whole life. So that made things easier, and he was a great caster, so I could pick up things from him. But, we started going out, and all of a sudden, we'd be like, wow, we caught striped bass, almost every trip on fly and bluefish and whatever. And so then we said, if we keep doing this, maybe we could do this as, a business and just do fly fishing in salt water. And, we're fortunate that there was a lot of very famous fly tyers from the area. Like Bob Popovic's lived in New Jersey, and, we know that guy, be able to go and pick his brain about stuff, and, he had some dynamite innovations, and he's right here in New Jersey, so you figure the stuff's going to work here. We started to catch better, and then it started becoming more popular, and a couple of clubs were very active, and then we said, well, maybe we can do this for a living. And the first 6 years or so, we didn't offer any other trip really but fly fishing. People wanted to bait fish, we would do it, or spin fish, one angler, whatever. But it was really a fly fishing charter, and then the fishing just got better and better for big fish, and it was stupid not to, at least try and target the bigger fish with live bait or artificials more. And, that kind of led me to figuring out, what lures are going to work, and I ended up starting my own tackle company based on stuff that was no longer available or wasn't made strong enough but worked really good. There's that little plug that you use that works great, but, the hooks get ripped off of it and they split and whatever. So I started to do that, but I think the fly fishing, understanding why flies were tied the way they were and the movement and all that certainly helped me in designing those hard baits, poppers and swimmers and stuff. So I tell you, it's not an understatement for me to say that fly fishing, learning how to fly fish and understanding that made me a much better fisherman than I would have been,
Man, it's really cool. It's so I think it's so wild, like just in small entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs in general, it's usually when they can fix a problem is when they do best. Like you fixing a problem with those baits and the hooks pulling, or having the bait that swims the right way or the right color, right selection. It's like fixing a problem that needs to be addressed in the fishing community, and then your bait business, I'm sure, did really well.
Yeah, and it was more about, trying to get stuff that I could use on my charters, put a plug in somebody's hand who never fished a swimming plug, let's say, and have them catch fish. And that's success. I mean, the other thing is certainly guiding made me much better because you have to be able to, share those nuances, like you say. Those little things that you do subconsciously that most people don't even know they do, but that's the difference between catching and not catching. So now you have to convey that to your clients, right? Like, so we don't like to hook a fish and hand a guy a rod and go, there you go, fish on, oh, God, that's so terrible to me. But, sometimes that's the reality of it. And we've done it in the past, but because the people just don't have enough experience, they don't get out enough, they don't get it. And to them, that's still that experience, that connection of that fish pulling on that rod, and it does it for them. And, and then the next time they'll be like, this time I want to do the whole thing. That's what the goal is. And also, I know it's a big subject for debate, and a lot of guys will tell you that I don't tournament fish. I hate tournaments. To each his own. I can tell you, tournament fishing made me a much better offshore fisherman than I ever was because, that was something else that I had to learn. I never had the boat big enough to consistently go offshore and effectively target those pelagics. Once I did, now you have to figure that out again, right? And when you're in a tournament, you don't get to pick the day, the tide, the moon phase, whatever, is there, for us in the Northeast, we got to wait for these warm water eddies to break off of the Gulf Stream and kind of spin into our canyons or whatever, right? So, when you could pick the day when the water's in there and the weather's right and all, yeah, and you go out there and catch, that's great. But when you have to do it on a day when you would probably not go out if it wasn't a tournament, because the weather's so bad or the moon is not right or whatever, and you still have to produce between 8 a.m. and 3:30 p.m., the worst times to fish. Most tournaments are run that way in the Northeast, the billfish tournaments at least. So now you got to try and catch these fish that swim thousands of miles in a month easily, that swim from country to country at will in a vast ocean, and in that tournament you have 125-mile radius that you can fish. So you talk about daunting, like that's tough, and you have to do that effectively if you want to continue. These things ain't cheap. They're thousands and thousands of dollars, a lot of them, and there's a lot of money at stake as well. And so if you're going to go out there and really do it the right way, be an effective tournament fisherman, that's going to make you a much better fisherman too. But I know a lot of people just don't do it. They feel like, oh, that's not what fishing is about for me. And I get it. That's, it's whatever turns you on. But I would tell you that if you want to accept the challenge and see if you don't learn something from it,
Exactly. What a high degree of difficulty. Yeah, and through that challenge of fishing those off times, fishing the off water, you have to force yourself to figure it out and find answers and catch fish. So yeah, I mean, the way you explain it, I can totally see why that made you a better fisherman. So like that offshore stuff, or you talk about those big fish that are really starting to show up. It sounds like that's when your neck of the woods gets really exciting. Like, what time of year does that happen? What fish are you targeting? And then what are some of your fly rod tactics, or how do you catch these fish with the fly rod? Because most of my salt experience has been on the flats and sight fishing for them, and I would imagine it's a little bit different fishery where you're at.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, from inshore, if you didn't talk about striped bass, you wouldn't be talking about an inshore fishery in the Northeast, right?
Wow,
I mean,
those striped bass have to be so fun, huh?
Yeah, and most people's charter businesses wouldn't exist without striped bass. I'll dare to say that fly fishing in the Northeast wouldn't exist without striped bass. You just, we don't have tarpon, right? We don't have redfish. We don't have those flat scenarios for the most part. So you're targeting what's here, and still that fish migrates over 1,000 miles, twice a year. So it's not, and I don't mean to diminish anything when I say this, it's not a largemouth in a farm pond. You know what I mean? Like, he ain't going nowhere. He's there, whatever. Like, these fish are migrating well over 1,000 miles twice a year. They have other things on their mind, right? They got to get back to the place they were born, to spawn. They got to get up in there, go and do their thing, come back out, stay fed, and then they're moving away from the changing water temperature, whether it's, warmer water, and they're moving away from it in the spring, or, the fall when it's colder water and they're moving towards warmer water. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on, and you're trying to intercept these fish with some hair tied on a hook, right? So that's, that inshore fishery is very challenging. That's what got me really obsessed with fly fishing inshore. And then I guess it's like that, that natural progression of a fisherman, right? First you want to catch everything, as many as you can. Then you want to try and catch them a certain way. And then you want to catch, like, the biggest ones, a certain way, and that's, all of those things make you better. And, once you do that in the Northeast, if you have the ability or the resources to do it, and you start venturing offshore for those pelagics, those bigger fish, the same fish that people catch in Africa.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like, think about that.
That's wild.
Those fish might not migrate from Africa up to here, but certainly they're migrating from, a blue marlin that swims past the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. That fish is coming up here, at some point probably. And I think they tagged the blue marlin once that went something like 2,300 miles in 30 days or some crazy, crazy number. And you say, wow, what's the chances of me intercepting that fish at that exact moment? You talk about, like, intersecting targets, coming together on a radar or something. Like, what's the chance that you're going to meet that fish at that point where he's eating, you're there, presenting what he wants to eat, whatever. And, that's trolling is tough enough because at least you're covering water, right? If you're trolling at 5 to 7 knots, whatever, 8 knots, you're covering a bunch of water. So you're at least now prospecting. You're trying to find these fish. We talk about, fly fishing. boat has to be out of gear. Your fly line can't be longer than whatever the IGFA legal thing is now, 125 feet or whatever. You got to cast it. Like, all of that stuff now coming together is much more difficult, and it makes you try and figure out more and more what's happening with those fish that you're targeting. But, for us, the most effective way that we target the tuna fish with the fly is to, first find them, then you could, either use a jig or a popper or a swimming plug, which is probably one of the largest growing sections of fishing up here now is, jigging and popping for tuna fish. There's special rods developed for it, reels, lines, lures. So that's a pinnacle of success on its own. And then we just try and take it to one step further than that. And once you found those fish, maybe once you caught a couple, now you take out the fly rod and you're trying to do the same thing. So most of the time that we're tuna fishing is, chunking or chumming and drifting and casting the fly. Sometimes, if you're lucky and all things come together, you can find busting fish on the surface and then cast into them with the fly, which is the ultimate way, right? That's really fly fishing. That's really, having the best of the best happen, and then you're going to try and catch them the hardest way. So many people have offshore fished their whole life and seen busting tuna fish on the surface very few times, So now, the last 3 or 4 years, it's gotten much better in the Northeast. You see it more often. But very few guys are going to come up on those raging fish and throw, a fly in there. Because it's so hard, And those fish are ones, like I say, if people don't understand fish anatomy, just a simple approach is the bigger the eye, the better they can see. So if you're looking for a fish with a big eye, he's going to be tough to catch,
Oh, that is wild, Frank. Yeah, and finding that magic out there, those busting tuna, it's such a big ocean. Like, to find where they're doing it, you have to have so much knowledge about the oceans, the current, the temperature, and then, looking for birds and looking for bait, and then to actually get into them and have them busting the surface like that and hitting a fly. That is wild. And, my dad used to run a charter boat out of Western Washington, in the Pacific Ocean there. And so, it's a salmon fishery, and then, there's some bottom fish as well. But then, a couple times a year, those tuna would come in close enough where you could go target them. And, you talk about a fish that can run and fight. Those things can swim. You probably know their mile per hour better than I do, but they are some of the fastest swimming fish, and some of the hardest fighting fish. I can't imagine when you get one to take a fly on that thing. I bet you're in for an absolute rodeo.
Oh, yeah. And, it's so sometimes, depending on how you're fly fishing, what kind of fish, it's pretty much a given. If you could hook it, you're going to, unless you do something drastically wrong, you're going to land it, right? But certainly in trout fishing, the little bit I'll say that I understand about it, and the really limited times I've been able to do it. Certainly, if those days where you have to go to super light tippet and that, and you're breaking fish off, yeah. So then it's not like a given, but most of the time, even outside of fly fishing, right? Like largemouth bass fishing, if you can get the bite, you're pretty much going to land it. And today's technology, with braided lines and that, you can still do those super, technical finesse fishing and still have very strong line. But, when you talk about fly fishing, 20-pound tippet maximum, if you're going to truly fly fish, and have fish that are 5 times that weight, easy, hitting it. We tried to do the 6-pound tippet world record for yellowfin during one of the episodes of my show, and that's what the show's about, is primarily trying to fish a tournament or go after a world record, you know. And we were lucky to break 12 world records, I think, on film. In, you know, ladies, men's, fly fishing, line classes, different stuff. So if you're going to target a certain fish on a certain tippet and they're very strong, I can tell you that I hooked half a dozen fish in between strips, tuna fish, on 6-pound tippet that broke me off. So I didn't even have the fly line. I wasn't pulling it away from them. You know, it was on the pause and they hit it. And like 6 times they broke me off. Just from the take. So, you know, you say, wow, that's a little tough. So finally I said, I'm going to waste a day here, missing an opportunity. I put 20-pound tippet on. Took me, I think I broke one more off quick. And then I landed a 40 or 45-pound yellowfin on a 10-weight. One of the highlights of my fly fishing, you know, career, I would say. It's just so challenging. You could have just stood there and jigged them and popped them. And like I said, that's great fishing. World-class fishing. But then to try and do it on the fly, a whole nother level, you know. And I guess that's what it, either you get it or you don't get it, you know. So there used to be this T-shirt that they used to sell at the motorcycle rallies when I used to ride a lot, and it said, if I have to explain, you wouldn't understand. And, you know, I think that's it about fly fishing too, you know, for sure. Like, people say all the time, why would you try and do that, you know, with a freshwater rod, or, you know, if they don't really understand that, you know. We fish for tunas sometimes with 16 weights, you know, if they're big fish around, but, or marlin fishing, you know, with those. But that's, I guess you just have to be up for the challenge and wanting to learn. And, you know, that's also the ability of having the ability, I should say, to go more often certainly lends itself more to you taking those risks, right? If a guy only gets to go out one day a week and, you know, that's the only day he can go, and you got to travel 90 miles offshore to go find a tuna fish, you might not be so jazzed about trying to catch him the hardest way possible, right? You might just want to just go out there and have fun, bend the rod, and it's challenging enough, like I said, even catching those fish on artificials, you know? But that progression a lot of people don't make because you need the ability to go very far here. You talk about, you know, your dad fishing the charter boat. I mean, they probably didn't have to go that far, right?
Right.
In the Pacific Northwest to try and find those fish, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting. Dude, I can't believe you landed that world record on 6-pound test. I have a tough time fishing for trout on 6-pound test.
Yeah, no, I didn't land one on 6 pounds. I went to 20 before I landed it, but I tried. Yeah, it's hard. So a lot of people don't think about the pound test when they trout fish. They're just talking X, right? Mm-hmm. 1X, 2X, yep. 0X, whatever. And you don't realize how light some of that leader is. 2-pound leader. Your buttons are sewn on your shirt with stronger, thread than 2-pound test leader.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've had to, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'll go to 4-pound test,
so that would be
which
what
is...
X is 2-pound.
1X is like a 12-pound or 10-pound, right in that range, right in there. But yeah, no, I understand totally what you're talking about.
Like a 5X or whatever is,
Yeah, exactly.
So light, and I have trouble tying my fly on with that stuff. But there's a whole other aspect of it, right? Every time you think about something, it opens up another door. Like, you want to fish light tippet? You're going to know how to tie good knots.
Yes.
Or you'd be tying a lot of them.
Yeah, no doubt. But that's a wild attempt. Yeah, I like having that heavier leader, but sometimes you got to go with that lighter leader. I know fish around here eating dry flies and stuff. Like, I'll have to go down to that lighter tippet, and boy, you gotta you got to play them out. The first one I had the other day on that lighter tippet, I busted off trying to get to the net. Just too much pressure. It's a totally different fight. But man, that's wild. That TV show of yours. That sounds like really fun to watch. Like you take on these different challenges and go to these different fisheries. What's the show, Frank?
So it's called Fin Chasers, and we aired 3 seasons. We shot the 4th season in the middle of the beginning part of this pandemic, and then shot a little bit during the pandemic, and then it just changed so much the kind of playing field of what companies were doing and what kind of advertising, and that's what drives the TV show. So we have most of the season shot here that will air once. I'll do some more stuff this year. It was so hard to try and travel and fish with people and masks on and all this stuff, and it was just it kind of took away for a large part of what I like about it, but we've set out to do something different, and I thought there's so many different fishing shows on. How am I going to be different? I mean, most of the stuff we do now is in the Northeast, and that's there's not many shows that really ever did that, but trying to do those world records was something I was always interested in, and I think I set my first one in '98 with a weak fish on fly, and I just became obsessed with it, and just following, I guess, the IGFA rules and guidelines. It just keeps you more true to the purest part of the sport. I'm not a purist fly fisherman. I'm not going to get upset that we have to use sinking lines. And it was funny, I was listening to one of your earlier podcasts where you talk about nymphing, and I know that's frowned upon in trout fishing. So like sinking lines and dredging, which is a terrible term that's used to talk about sinking flies, in salt water, using sinking lines and dredging flies. Like, you can call it whatever you want. It ain't easy.
No, I don't imagine.
In a lot of ways, I'll go the other way, and I'll say, it's harder to fish a sinking line, So, now you're trying to you got to produce, so you got to fish any way you can. Now you're trying to do these certain tippets for these certain fish. So you're narrowing down really to a fine point of how you're going to measure your success, right? But the trick for me is, we got to have fun through that whole process, or it's not going to be worth it, And I think that's why people feel funny or have certain feelings about tournament fishing, because I guess they think that could, kind of bring out the I just got to catch a fish kind of thing, and people lose sight of the fun or, why you're doing it, and if we learned anything through this past year through all this pandemic stuff, if you didn't have a new appreciation for just being able to go out with a friend and fly fish, you don't get it, right? I mean, they closed streams down where you couldn't go there as a single angler. Like, what? That's the most way you're going to social distance from anybody. And then, you just couldn't do that, so people lose their mind. I was lucky I had my bay boat, and I was able to, go out every day that I wanted to and dissect, these fisheries. And, that's the kind of thing, I guess, that we try and bring through with the show. Like, whatever you do and whatever turns you on, make it fun. And, don't lose sight. Don't let the goal, ruin the whole experience for you,
It's really well said.
You're learning every time. You learn. I'm learning every time. I still, there's very few trips that I go on where I don't learn something, I guess if you're looking for it, you learn, and that's the thing about fly fishing. I really had to visualize what that world is like that those fish live in, right? Like, that's the place I go to a lot. So, like, this fish is living in a cold, dark place for the most part of it, right? Spring and fall, the best times to fish up here. The water's, either slowly warming or slowly cooling. But on the bottom, a lot of times it's pretty cold and dark. And, it's not flats fishing in Florida where the water's warm and these fish are just sitting there sunning themselves. These fish that we're fishing for the most part, are, on the move, trying to live in this crazy environment. And, we've done a lot of underwater video, both within the show and outside the show. In the conservation work that I did for 17 years, the first time I got involved was videotaping the bottom where they were going to dump this toxic waste in New York Harbor. And you get that bird's eye view of what that world is like, that fish is living in. And then you try and figure out, well, he's down there doing this, looking for fish, holding in a spot for bait or whatever. And, like, how am I going to convince this fish that what I got is what they're looking for, And that, when I get to that place and I try and figure out what that looks like, it makes you really think about, like, whoa, I gotta make sure that fly, when it's a foot or two off the bottom, sweeping through that hole, whatever it is, it's going to have movement or whatever. And it just makes you think about things differently, I think, when you kind of look at it from that perspective, because it's a wild place down there where most of these fish live in the Northeast. Current, tide, wind, changing water clarity, conditions, other predators. Like, there's a lot going on. They're not just sitting in a bathtub waiting for the first thing to drop into the water so they can jump on it,
Man, it's so wild. There's so many different factors that play into it, and you explain it so well, the passion for fly fishing that you need. And we call it around here the defective gene club, where it's like us guys that's all we think about is fishing, and it's but passion is good for us guys. Like guys, I think that's what's missing in a lot of the world right now is that passion. Having something that you love wholeheartly, that you go home, that you think about when you're on the water, that you put this constant effort into, and then too, I loved what you said about like not letting the goal ruin the fun of the trip. Like, every day is different out there, and if you're only having fun when you catch that big trout or when you break that world record, you're missing it, and you're not going to enjoy fishing. You have to enjoy the entire process. You have to enjoy those days where you're not getting them, where you're trying to figure it out, and then also enjoy the days that you are getting them. But it's that love for it, or that passion for it, where you really dive into it wholeheartedly, and you're working out all these details, and I think it's a sign of true intelligence too. And I don't, fishermen, we're not known as the smartest guys in the world, but that problem solving of being able to look at those conditions and come up with the answers to try to make that fish eat down there, some hair tied onto a fly, man. It's just it's an amazing journey, and I think like guys like us are really lucky that we found that thing in life that we love, and it it's not tied to money or wealth or status or anything like that. It's tied to this love of fishing and that love of the problem solving and the challenge of the whole deal. And man, it's just wild. We live in two different parts of the country, but I can just hear that passion come through in your voice, like every time you talk about fly fishing for those things. And I think like that's one of the incredible things that guys like me and you like have so much in common. And this is the first time we've met and chatted on the phone, dude. It's just wild.
Yeah, it is. And it's, like I say, it goes back to that thing. Like, if I have to explain to you and understand, like, even just in fishing in general, like, some people, when they think about fishing, they think about a guy sitting on an overturned 5-gallon bucket on the end of a pier, right, with a rod hanging over the side, with a piece of bait on there, just waiting for whatever happens to come by, right? And when you talk about fly fishing in salt water, you couldn't be further away from that if you tried. It's just so different. And, you either have it or you don't, right? Like, and that's not that there's anything wrong with that. Hey, hold on 1 second.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry, I had to get gas here.
Oh, no biggie.
But yeah, and there's not that anything is wrong with it if people aren't into it that much. But like, you get it, right? Like, I was talking about like you're at a party and some people say, "Oh, what do you do?" "Oh, I'm a fly fishing guy," whatever. And sometimes, "Oh, that's interesting," or "Where do you fish?" or "What do you?" But when you talk about like in New York, and they go, "What do you mean?" No, but you live in New York City. Yeah. Well, where do you fish in New York City? Do you go to lakes or? No. We fish in New York Harbor. And it's like, no, but like, I understand you pick up people in Manhattan, but where do you fish? I'm like, right there. Like, it's as much as it's been written about, we talk about it in TV shows and whatever, a lot of people still don't know about it. And a lot of people don't know about that even live in New York City. So one of the people that I was fortunate enough to meet and call a friend and, guy for many years, Jack Handy. So he was on Saturday Night Live for years, a writer, and he used to do this skit called Deep Thoughts by Jack Handy, and it's hysterical. And so this one day, I get a call, and the guy says, "Yeah, I want to book a trip, whatever." And he gives me his name, I write down, send him a contract, whatever. And so we're watching, like, the Emmys on a Sunday night or whatever, and Saturday Night Live wins an Emmy, and they announce all the writers, and they say Jack Handy. And I said to my wife, "I got a guy coming Tuesday, Jack Handy. I wonder if it's the same guy." So, whatever, I don't think about it again. The guy gets on the boat, and he puts down a bag on the boat that says SNL on it. And like, I've been watching Saturday Night Live since I'm a little kid. Like, I'm like, holy shit, you're that Jack Handy. He's like, "Oh, yeah, I lived here, for 30 years, and I gotta tell you, this is the first time I've never fly fished in salt water." He just came back from some river in Oregon where he was, fishing. And so now I'm like, geez, this guy fishes all over the world. And he lives in New York City. And like, I'm going to try and catch him a fish here. And like, a lot of pressure. And he brings his friend, this guy, John Fortenberry, who's, a world-renowned director, did so many different shows. And like, you might not know his name. The shows he directed so many episodes of, and he invented this thing on I think it was on Nickelodeon. Clarissa explained it all, and my two daughters used to watch it. So I'm like, wow, this is cool. These two guys, like, I know their work and whatever, and now they're coming to me, and we're supposed to catch fish on fly, and it was a little funny, but in September in the Northeast, it could be up and down, but you do have a chance at a mixed bag. An inshore slam for us, right, would be a striped bass, a bluefish, a weakfish, or a false albacore, mixed in any of those three or three out of the four. And, that day we caught striped bass, bluefish, and false albacore all on fly. And it was the first time those two guys come with me, right? So I looked like a rock star. And just everything came together, and, we were there. And he fished with me for years after that. He now lives in Santa Fe, and, used to come back at least once a year and fish with me. I didn't see him in the last 2 years, but here's a guy who lived in New York City, fly fished all over the world, has resources, right? Meets a lot of people in the job that he does, so he's not living in a cave, he's not a hermit, and he doesn't know that this fly fishing is this good. And some people thought of it as a novelty. It's not. It was legitimate world-class fishery, fly fishery. The striped bass diminished over the years. The last 10 years, it's been going down. But there's finally some change on the books, regulation-wise, and there's some signs of some changes. So that'll help the inshore fishing. But, when you think about it from that perspective, you say, like, wow, I guess a lot of people aren't really tuned into this as much. So when you live in that world and obsessed as we are, and that, you know, you just get it. And sometimes you meet people, and I guess where I was going with the story is like, you'll meet that one person and you go, oh yeah, I'm a fly fish. And they go, oh yeah, I do that. And then boom, that's the connection, right? And then you just spend the rest of that time you're at that place talking to that person.
Instant friends, right? You know you got something that you both love,
right.
you know, common ground. Man, that's such a wild setting, like fishing New York, like looking at the city there and like getting out of the hustle and bustle and then being on the water enjoying yourself. That it's just got to be this amazing contrast to that. And to be honest, I didn't know that fishery existed either. And it's just crazy. I think, like, as much as I love to travel and I love to explore and see new things, like, there's something for all of us to enjoy around where we live. Like, we're so fortunate. Like, almost you choose almost any spot in the lower 48, and within an hour or two you can find some fishing of some sort. But it's about enjoying what's right around you, whether that's hunting or whether that's fishing. But some of these outdoor activities, and really it's just exploring. And like, I've lived in this spot in a rural town in Montana for 20 years, and I live on one of the best fly fishing rivers there is, the Madison River. It's a blue ribbon trout stream.
Even I know what that is.
Yeah, so it's great. But the problem is I got stuck in a rut over the years where any free day I'd go down and I'd learn the Madison, and it, you know, all the floats are different. It'll challenge you. There's big fish in there. There's a lot of fish in there. And so it's this challenging fishery. But what I was missing out is like all these streams that are right around me. And not that I never fished them, but I didn't fish them enough to where in the last handful of years, I've really been stepping outside my comfort level and doing all these different rivers. And it's amazing that I've lived here for 20 years. And Saturday was the first day I fished this river with my dad. I took him over to a new stream, and it's within an hour of my house. I have so much great fishing around me and 20 years of exploring, and there's still rivers and floats that I've never done. And I think it's just like we have to really put in the effort to enjoy what's right around us and to have fun and to find joy. And man, you've done a heck of a job, like figuring out a really tough fishery in that, around New York and out on that offshore stuff. Man, it's just amazing to like hear that, hear your journey of trying to learn that stuff and take on fly fishing and the challenge of it, man. It's just absolutely awesome.
Yeah, man, I feel fortunate to be able to do it. You know, guiding certainly made that possible for me. And that made me learn the local waters. And it's such a good point that you bring up about that is, I guess, especially when we first started fly fishing. So I guess I don't even finish the story. I know when I bought my first fly rod was it was my 30th birthday, so I'm 57 this year. So, yeah, I guess it's 27 years, almost 30 years. So I know when we started, and I know what the fishing was like back then. And I guess to try and be as successful as we could, or up the possibility of our success, we started to try and, travel to these other spots in and around New York and New Jersey to have the best chance of success, I guess, right? So we would go to Montauk, we go to Long Island, we go to those, those legendary historic spots and start to catch there. But the real learning, the real enjoyment came when I remember this guy from Long Island said, we were saying, hey, maybe we'll come out and fish by you one time, whatever. He was a guide. And he was like, yeah, you're welcome to do that. He's like, but, for years there was a great fishery where you guys are. And, learning your own backyard has something to say about your skill or something. I forget exactly how to put it. And I was like, boom, it rang a bell. And I was like, you know what? He's right. We're learning to fly fish. We should learn here. Stay here and see what we can do here. And I guess for a lot of people, last year brought that really home, right? I know for me, I only had my bay boat. I didn't have a bigger boat until later on in the year last year. And I always usually have an offshore boat and an inshore boat. And I only had the inshore boat. And then with the pandemic, we're at home. The other businesses I have, we're working from home, and every day, all I had was to go out and get some sanity from going out fishing. And I will tell you that I dissected a piece of water that's probably, say, 100 yards long and 20 yards wide in salt water in the bay by my house. And I figured it out, and I've owned that house since 2002, and I caught more fish in that stretch of water last year than I did in all the years added up together. Because I could go out, not spend the time driving, traveling, whatever, and just learn. And then I went to other parts of the bay that I normally just make a stop here, stop there, whatever, you catch a fish, whatever. But I said, I'm going to use every day I can here to try and figure this stuff out. And I needed something that in depth to keep me occupied, because, the other side of having that obsessive personality is your mind never stops. So if you don't have something good to think about, you're going to obsess about all the other stuff. So I was like, I'm going to go out there, and it's 5-6 days a week at least. I fished, and, which is not out of the ordinary for me at certain times of the year, but, it didn't matter, rainy, windy, cold, no fish, 6 trips in with no fish, and you're still going out there today's going to be the day. I don't know if that's stupidity or genius, but, they run very close together, but it worked out, and, I caught some quality weak fish on the fly, which I hadn't caught in years. And now, are they starting to show up again? Maybe a little bit. Not many people I know caught them at all, and very few people I know caught them at all on fly, because I made sure that, I was there doing it with the fly. So, even the other day, the fishing was tough. The fish I were catching was small strappers, and I was like, if this is all I'm going to catch, I'm going to, pull more with this swinging of the fly, which is the new obsession for me, because my partner does it in Florida for the snook all the time. And I'm like, yeah, well, we fish like that all the time. We're always swinging the fly. It's like, no. You got to do it, a certain way. And so I started doing that more and more. And it's fun. That's the thing about fly fishing. Even if you don't catch and you're learning to cast better, or to, swing a fly a certain way, or, figure out how to get deeper in fast water. All those things are, and I hear people talk about it with golfing, right? They'll be like, I didn't have a great game, but I had some great shots, and I only golfed once, and I lost 5 balls in 3 holes, and that was enough for me. But, with fly fishing, yeah, it's that stroke. It's the same thing about learning how to hit that ball in golfing, and it's a commitment, right? You got to have the right gear. You got to learn a certain degree, and then you got to go out there and trial and error. But you're always constantly trying to get better, right? And you can get caught up in the tech, in the gear, or the newest technique or whatever. But really understanding your natural ability and inability, and then adapting that to being successful, So those are the things that, if you really dissect it, you can get down to, and those are game changers, right? Understanding, whatever it is for you. I'm never going to be able to throw a 100-foot cast, right? I'm not, I cannot, I don't have the finesse to, put that fly in front of that fish on a flat, 4 inches for the nose. I don't do it enough. I don't have enough practice with it. But I can cast for it, but I'm not good at finesse angler, or I'm really good at the finesse, but, I can't do this other thing, whatever it is. But understanding, what you're good at and what you're not good at. And I think this, you don't want to, certainly as you get older, you have to wrestle with this more, but you get to the point where you're like, I'm as good as I'm going to be distance caster as I am now. You know what I mean? But I've done everything I can do, and this is where I get to. And like, that's your greatest strength, or your greatest weakness can be your greatest strength too. You know? So you can't cast far, but you got to figure out how to get that fly down in that spot that you can get to, you know, or whatever it is. But just understanding that whatever those limitations are based on your ability, your gear, you know, what kind of access you have, but then learn how to be successful within those guidelines, you know, really makes you figure stuff out and you become good. And maybe some people go like, man, that's way too much work. There's a saying I have that's not mine, and it says, if it's easy, everybody would do it. And when you think about things in that term, that one phrase really puts things in perspective, right? For a lot of things in life.
It does.
Everybody would do it.
Oh, it's so true.
So,
yeah.
You know, but, you know, that's I guess that's the thing about fly fishing. You have, you know, maybe more time to think about those things, you know. Because maybe the learning curve is certainly longer than other types of fishing. So you have to think about that stuff more, you know.
Yeah, it's fun to hear you talk about it. I just hear the passion in your voice, and it is like we embrace that challenge. You know, I think it, because it's difficult, is the reason why we like it. You know, and also, you know, you may get limited out, like you're talking about your casting. You may be as good as you're ever going to get at casting, but in the world of fly fishing, you're constantly evolving, constantly getting better and adding knowledge. You're adding layers of knowledge to it. And the thing I love about it is there's no limit to how good you can get. There's no limit to how good of a fly fisherman or how efficient you can get or how much knowledge that you can obtain throughout your lifetime. Like you say, every day on the water you're learning, and if you're paying attention to that information and using it to get better, you're constantly improving, you know, and I think that's part of the fun of it. But it's so fun to hear you talk about it, Frank. Like I'm so glad I got to connect with you and have you on the podcast. Tell people where they can find you or where we can find that TV show. I want to check out those 3 seasons of that deal, man. It sounds like a super fun show to watch.
Yeah, thanks. We have on Amazon Prime, we have 1 season streaming there, and then on Discovery On Demand, you can find it. Just look up Fin Chasers. Easiest thing, search in your, you know, search menu there, Fin Chasers, and one of the ones that are online and streaming. We syndicated the show last year, so it showed up in 200 different networks across the country, and some regional stuff, but the Discovery stuff that's on demand will still be on there, and then Amazon, like I said, and then we have all the seasons on Vimeo as well. There's so many different ways to stream it. And then, it's FinChasersTV.com is the website for the TV show, and the charter service is FinChasers.com. So we've been fortunate to do a bunch of different stuff. I have the ability to do a bunch of different stuff, and you know, I tell people, when you don't see me doing something anymore, it's not fun anymore for me because, you know, the time, again, in this past year, if you didn't come to realize it, you know, there's a saying, time is perishable and non-renewable. No matter how much money you have in this life, how much success you had, nobody can make more time. So when you're out there, you know, doing that time for yourself, you better be enjoying it, whatever it is, you know. And I'm fortunate for me, it's been fishing my whole life. It's been my obsession my whole entire life. And it doesn't show any signs of waning, fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it. But it's been a lot of fun, and like I said, every day I'm still out there learning, man. So I'd love for you to come out and fish sometime. And one of the things I never fished, one of the areas is the Pacific Northwest, so maybe I can make it up there sometime to where, you know, you grew up, maybe you show some of that stuff to me. But, I mean, that's the other thing, man. New places, new people, you know, different experiences. And the one thing I'll say, and I'll close with this, as much as people may think fly fishermen are snooty or think they're better than other people, that I challenge you to find another group of people at a super high level in any sport that are as willing to share as fly fishermen are. From a guy like Lefty Gray, who's the godfather of fly fishing in my mind, certainly in salt water, that you could walk up to, God rest his soul, any show that he was at, and he'd spend a half an hour talking to somebody, that never fly fished before in their life. Like, there's so many guys that are, that have been doing that for years and years and years. And, the wealth of knowledge that's out there now is unprecedented. What you're doing now, a podcast, didn't exist, 20 years ago, for sure. The ability to look up a certain fly on the internet and see what it's like, or a fishing report from a certain area. The resources are there. All people have to do is take advantage of it, and you can shortcut to success a lot faster, But ultimately, the difference between fly fishing and other types of fishing is I could tell you the spot, I could tell you what to use when you get there, but there's that level of knowing what to do when you get there, and understanding the differences of however you fished before, fly fished, and adapting that, right? And that's, again, goes back to, you can't just drop a weighted beaded hook into the one hole that exists in this spot, right? You got to cast that fly, that line has to sink or not, and swing in there, and just at that right moment, you're pulling on that string, and that's the biggest difference in any kind of fishing, is in that fly fishing, your hand is connected to that fish's mouth, right?
So
and
well
that's
said.
the thing you don't get in a lot of fishing. And to feel it, man, it either rings your bell or it don't, and if it does, you just can't make that ringing stop.
That's so true, Frank. So well said. Let's end on that. I have really enjoyed this conversation and connecting with you. And yeah, you're always welcome if you make it out to this side of the country. Make sure to look me up, and let's keep in touch. And just a great conversation. I can't thank you enough for your time.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I really appreciated it. And sometimes talking about this stuff, kind of makes you reflect on why you do it and have another level of appreciation for it, which certainly, happens when I talk about this stuff. So, thank you.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we'll talk soon. Thanks, Frank.
Man. Take care.